For centuries, India was this legendary land of incredible wealth, a magnet for anyone with a ship and a dream. We're talking spices, silks, jewels. It was the place to be. It drew Europeans across treacherous seas, all of them wanting a slice of the pie. But this story, it's not just about trade. It's about how a single English company, in just about 100 years, went from being humble merchants to the absolute rulers of an entire subcontinent. All right, let's dive into how this incredible transformation actually happened. This quote from an 18th century Indian ruler, Alivardi Khan, just nails it. He saw the European companies exactly for what they were: a beehive, a source of honey, massive profits from trade and taxes, but also a potential danger. If you provoked them, you were going to get stung. And for a long time, that delicate balance actually worked. But as you can probably guess, it was a balance that just wasn't meant to last. And it wasn't just the English who wanted in on the action. I mean, look at this timeline. It was getting pretty crowded over there. The Portuguese kicked things off way back in 1498, and then everyone else piled in: the English, the Dutch, the Danish, and finally the French. You had all these rivals crammed into one region, all chasing the same fortune. A massive showdown was pretty much inevitable, right? So you've got this royal rumble of European powers, all vying for control. How on earth did one company, the English East India Company, end up on top of the pile? Well, it wasn't luck. They were strategic, and they were ruthless. They systematically took out every single one of their rivals. What's so fascinating here is you can see their method, plain as day. It was like a hit list. One by one, they knocked out the competition. The Battle of Swali in 1612, that shattered the Portuguese Navy's power. The Battle of Badara in 1759, same thing happened to the Dutch. And then finally, the big one, the Battle of Wandiwash in 1760, that basically crushed the ambitions of their biggest rivals, the French. The field was being cleared for a single winner. So let's zoom in on that last rivalry, because really, it was the most important one. The fight between the British and the French wasn't just about who could sell more tea anymore. Oh no. It had escalated into a full-blown military conflict for the control of India itself. This was the main event. This whole struggle just exploded into three massive conflicts that we now call the Carnatic Wars. The first one was basically a European fight that just spilled over onto Indian soil. But the second and third wars, they were a total game changer. Both companies started playing kingmaker, getting involved in local politics, backing rival Indian princes just to expand their own power. It was the classic strategy of divide and conquer, and by the time the dust settled, the British had mastered it. They were the clear winners. So why did the British win and the French lose? Well, this slide breaks it down perfectly. The English simply had a stronger navy and more commercial muscle. And this is huge. They had three major ports: Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. The French, they really only had Pondicherry. You add in better government support and unified command for the British compared to the infighting and weaker backing for the French, and yeah, the outcome was almost a foregone conclusion. With their European competition basically knocked out of the ring, the East India Company turned its attention to the grand prize, Bengal. This was the richest province in all of India. Conquering it would give them the money and the manpower they needed to take over the rest of the subcontinent. This, right here, was the real turning point. And they had a playbook for it, a simple but incredibly brutal cycle: war, treaties, and then more war. They'd provoke a fight, force a weakened Indian ruler into a treaty, and then use the terms of that very treaty as an excuse to launch a final, decisive war to take everything. It was a pattern they would use again and again and again. And this brings us to one of the most pivotal, almost infamous moments in Indian history: the Battle of Plassey. It's always remembered as this great British victory that kicked off the empire. But here's the crazy part. It wasn't really a battle, not in the traditional sense. So how in the world was it won? The answer is betrayal, pure and simple. The British commander, Robert Clive, he won this thing before a single shot was really fired. He cut a secret deal with the inner circle of the Nawab of Bengal, including his own top general, Mir Jafar. So on the day of the battle, huge chunks of the Nawab's army just stood there. They refused to fight. It was a conspiracy, a coup that handed Bengal to the British on a silver platter. So here's the key takeaway. Plassey wasn't a military conquest. It was a political takeover. It gave the company a staggering amount of wealth from Bengal's treasury and the power to put a puppet on the throne. This was the absolute foundation on which the entire British Empire in India was about to be built. But if Plassey was won with whispers and backroom deals, just 7 years later came the real test of British military power. At the Battle of Buxar, the company went up against a massive alliance: the Mughal Emperor, the Nawab of Oudh, and the former Nawab of Bengal. This wasn't about conspiracy. This was a head-on, no-holds-barred fight that would decide who really ran the show in northern India. And the British won. Decisively. This slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? Plassey laid the foundation through treachery. Buxar consolidated that foundation with brute military force. After Buxar, nobody could deny it. The East India Company wasn't just another player anymore. It was the power in India. All right, so with Bengal secured, the whole British game plan changed. It wasn't about just winning battles anymore. Now, it was about systems. It was about implementing these brilliant and, let's be honest, pretty insidious policies to just absorb the rest of India, one piece at a time. Just take a look at the powerful kingdom of Mysore. It took the British 4 separate wars over 30 years to finally bring them down. They faced incredible resistance from rulers like Tipu Sultan. But the British were just relentless. They formed alliances with Mysore's enemies and just slowly, methodically ground them down until the kingdom was defeated and forced to submit. And this is how they started doing it, not just with guns, but with paperwork. The Subsidiary Alliance, it was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. An Indian ruler would sign this treaty, get rid of his own army, and then pay the British to protect him. But in reality, he lost all his independence. He became a puppet, and his state was now effectively a British protectorate. And this policy worked immediately. The powerful Nizam of Hyderabad was the first major ruler to fall into the trap and sign away his kingdom's freedom in 1798. Once that first domino fell, it created a blueprint. One by one, other states were pressured into doing the same. The independent kingdoms of India began to disappear. Now, if you thought that was sneaky, get a load of this next one. The doctrine of lapse was even more direct, even more brutal. The rule was simple. If a ruler under British protection died without a natural-born son, his kingdom was just taken, annexed by the British. The age-old Indian tradition of adopting an heir, the British just said, nope, doesn't count. And the results were swift and devastating, as you can see from this list. Major states like Satara, Jhansi, and Nagpur were just erased from the map, swallowed whole by British territory. This policy created so much resentment and a deep sense of injustice. You had rulers stripped of their kingdoms, their heritage, everything. It was a grievance that basically lit the fuse for a massive explosion that was just around the corner. So you add it all up, the military wins, the political betrayals, and these incredibly cunning policies. And just like that, the transformation was complete. Just think about that for a second. From the Battle of Plassey in 1757 to 1857, in the span of a single century, a private corporation, with its headquarters thousands of miles away in London, had become the absolute master of one of the world's oldest, richest civilizations. A simple trading company had become a full-blown empire. But the very things they used to build it, the betrayals, the broken treaties, the annexations, had created this deep, simmering well of resentment. The question wasn't if the empire would be challenged, it was when. And the answer to that question would come loud and clear in 1857.